I want to spend just a few minutes talking about the design of services. To do that, I want to tell you a story about a company I started about 10 years ago. At that time, I used to take my two young sons camping in Vermont. We owned a small amount of property where we would go and camp, and it was about a 5-hour drive from Philadelphia. I was thinking about building a cabin on that site, which I did do a little bit later. And in order to get access to the property and to haul my tools and my kids and my camping gear, I felt I needed a pickup truck. So I had a Ford F-150, which is a full-size pickup truck. And I used to drive that pickup truck to Vermont, which is about a 5-hour drive, with my two sons to spend the weekend. And we would do this several times during the summer. Shown here, by the way, is a photo of my two sons sleeping in the back of the pickup truck after a cool spring evening. My younger son, the one you've seen in the ice cream videos, is shown there on the left, and my older son, the baseball player, who's now in college, is shown there on the right. Anyway, on those long drives back and forth to Vermont in that full-size pickup truck, I developed quite a bit of guilt about the amount of gasoline that I was consuming and about my own personal contributions to climate change and to greenhouse gas emissions. And I started to think about whether there might be a way for me to mitigate the impact of my actions. I was fully willing to pay or to otherwise take action in order to mitigate the negative environmental effects of that driving, but I didn't really know how to do that. So I sat down one day and figured out that I could take advantage of an offer that the utility company in Philadelphia was offering, which was that they would buy wind power in sufficient quantity such that you could claim that all of the electricity that you used in your house came from wind. And so I sat down and I figured out what the fossil fuel equivalent was of the amount of electricity that I would use in my house. And I constructed an equivalency between a gallon of gasoline and a certain number of kilowatt hours of electricity. And I figured out that if I could buy wind power from the utility company in an amount that would be roughly equivalent to the amount of gasoline that I would burn going back and forth in my truck to Vermont. And so about 10 years ago, I started buying wind power from the utility company in an amount that offset the quantity of gasoline that I burned going back and forth to Vermont. Now, I'm an unusual guy and I sometimes do unusual things, but I thought I was probably the only person who would find this at all attractive. But I was telling a story about this mechanism that I developed to one of my friends who coincidentally also had a cabin project in Vermont and also had a full-size pickup truck. And he said, that's really interesting. He said, I'd do that too. And so we sat down and conceived of this idea that maybe we could create a product or really a service that would offer people the chance to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions of their driving, and that we would do that as a service, and that we would try to create a company around that idea. Now, I didn't really think that there was much commercial potential for this idea. This was a need that I had and one other crazy friend of mine had. We didn't think very many people would share this gap that we perceived. But nevertheless, we embarked on this idea of maybe creating a little business around this service. Now, because I didn't think there was much commercial potential, I set up this project, this new company project, as an activity for one of my classes at the University of Pennsylvania. And so I, my friend George, and a group of 44 graduate students got together for a semester and took on this idea of developing a service to mitigate the impact of driving. We took that on as a class project. So what I'd like to do now is tell you just a little bit about what happened to that project and then reflect a little bit on how the design process applies to the design of services. To make a long story short, that project became the company TerraPass. TerraPass now has several million members and is the largest retailer of environmental offsets in the United States. The company has grown into many other types of businesses, including the development of greenhouse gas mitigation projects like landfill gas recapture and farm methane recapture. I'm very proud of what TerraPass has become, but in essence, it's the ultimate service. Effectively, what TerraPass does is allows people to mitigate the impact of their actions on the environment. And in essence, what TerraPass sells is the lack of something, and thus it's the ultimate intangible. It really is very much a pure intangible service. And thus you could really ask the question, in what way does design play a role in the creation of this artifact, where this artifact, in essence, is actually the lack of something. It's actually the mitigation of an impact on the environment. Anyway, I'll let you, at your own convenience, check out TerraPass. I hope you find it interesting. But I want to just turn for a few minutes now and tell you about some of the elements of the process that we went through to create this service and the role of design in doing so. People sometimes make a distinction between physical goods and services. It's useful to think about the continuum between goods and services. You might imagine as a pure service a insurance policy. This is an example of an English fire insurance certificate from 1796. Insurance is essentially a pure financial product related to risk, which you could imagine as a pure service. At the other extreme, you could imagine a pure physical good being something like nails. Nails are often bought in bulk as a commodity and often are not even branded, and so you can imagine them as something that are purely physical. But the reality is that most products, even those that we think of as services, are really a combination of goods and services. So for instance, if you think of a restaurant, which is normally thought of as a service, like KFC, indeed KFC provides a service, that is, it cooks and delivers meals to its users, but many aspects of the artifact of the service that are being delivered, in fact, are physical, starting with the food itself, but also including the packaging, the built environment in which the restaurant operates, the collateral materials, and so forth. So the reality is almost all artifacts are in some sense a bundle of physical goods and services and are almost always a hybrid. In the case of TerraPass, let me just give you a few examples. We began with the conception of how one might indicate membership in TerraPass. The original idea was that you would have a decal that would go on the rear bumper of the vehicle and possibly a license plate or tag that would go on the front of the vehicle. And the original concept, we used the placeholder Benven as the possible company and product name. And this was just a concept sketch to explore various ways of actually expressing membership or indicating membership in TerraPass. The reality is that we ended up expressing membership in TerraPass with a decal, and I'm sorry for the bad photograph. I just shot this morning. It was a sunny day and hard to get it just right, but the basic idea is that the decal looks very much like a registration sticker. Users felt that they wanted something that was a little more official looking, but also quite unobtrusive. And so this is a sticky decal, a self-stick decal that goes on the inside of the window. It looks much like a registration sticker. And then TerraPass offered optionally a bumper sticker that users could apply to their car if they were interested in evangelism and expressing their enthusiasm for the TerraPass service. So that's an element of the service that actually required quite a bit of design effort and actually is a physical good that is delivered in conjunction with the service. Another example is the information design associated with communicating what the service does. This was the original description of what the TerraPass service would do. looking at it now, I'm not even sure I can understand it, and I'm not sure I could explain it to you. It was way too complicated. It was very hard to communicate. And so there was a key design challenge, which was how to communicate what the service actually did. What the designers ended up coming up with was this description, which was a 4-panel storyboard, which basically goes as follows. Your car emits 10,000 pounds in carbon dioxide each year. And sorry for the English units, but this was targeted largely in the US. So your car emits 10,000 pounds in carbon dioxide each year. Second, you enroll in TerraPass. Third, TerraPass members finance projects that reduce industrial CO2 emissions. And fourth, your TerraPass purchase is certified to eliminate the equivalent of your car's CO2 pollution, helping to preserve the environment for future generations. This description of the TerraPass service worked quite well and was the result of deliberate design. As I've already indicated, almost all services involve branding and naming, and this is an example of a few of the 3,000 names that we generated as a team in order to identify the right brand for this service. Most of these, of course, are terrible, but we ran them through an innovation tournament in order to identify those that were most promising. Indeed, another aspect of service design, or another example in which design methods are used in services, is the final selection of the name. This is a concept test, almost exactly the same as the concept test which is used for physical goods, in order to identify which of the final 3 names we would go with. And what we did in this case was to instantiate the name in a form that we could envision the customer or the user understanding. So in this case, we showed an affinity card, a credit card, a decal, and then a little bit of text. And we simply used this form in order to have people rank their preferred name 1, 2, or 3. Lastly, services almost always include branding and identity. And so in addition to just the brand name, there's typically a logo or some kind of mark associated with the service. I've already shown you this example, but essentially we used a tournament structure in order to identify the identity or the symbol, the logo that would go along with the TerraPass brand. In sum, any particular artifact is almost always a blend of physical good and services. The distinction between physical goods and services are really not very meaningful when it comes to design. The design process looks essentially identical anywhere along that continuum from pure physical good to pure service.